Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. In my youth, I envisioned living a steady existence in my tiny hometown, near to family and surrounded by a familiar community. Brookfield was a peaceful community where everyone knew each other's business. In our close-knit environment, I frequently envisaged establishing my own business and enjoying a simple, meaningful life with someone I cared about. It wasn't a huge vision, but it was my own, founded on principles that were important to me: loyalty, hard effort, and honesty. Years passed while I fashioned out a modest career that seemed appropriate for the leisurely pace of my community. After graduation, I met Laura, a lady with a very different upbringing from mine. She was the local banker's daughter, nurtured in a privileged environment far different from my more humble background. Despite, or maybe because of, our disagreements, we discovered common ground. I developed a company, married Laura, and we have 2 great children. Life seemed to have finally fallen into a rhythm that encompassed my family, my expanding company, and a future that I was confident in. But life has a way of stealing everything you value and dispersing it in the wind. I went from a point of great happiness, married to Laura, raising our 2 children, operating a flourishing company, and deeply established in the community I adored, to a nightmare that unfurled in a matter of weeks. This is the tale of how I quickly fell from the pinnacle of satisfaction to the depths of sorrow. I reside in Brookfield, a tiny Midwestern town with a population of roughly 1,000. The closest community, a town of 20,000 people, is around 60 miles distant, with a few minor villages in between. We have various convenience stores, early prototypes of large box stores like Super Value with find-it-all shops that mostly sell food but also offer areas for toys, clothing, office supplies, and even fabric for seamstresses. We also have a small pharmacy, a local Elite Hardware, a farm store, coffee cafes, a major local bank, a small credit union, and my own computer services firm. My firm mostly provides IT consultancy. I offer gear, PCs, servers, and monitors mostly to customers seeking a full-service package that includes network support. My clientele include a bank, a hospital, and an educational institution. My nearest competition is in a bigger city, but I also have customers there and often handle their networks. I should definitely introduce myself. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 30 years old. I'm approximately 6 feet tall and weigh about 180 pounds on a good day. Until recently, I was married to Emily Harrison, who will remarry after our divorce is official. We were married 7 years. I believe those were nice years, but she didn't think so and surprised me with the divorce news. Now, we were not high school sweethearts. We scarcely spoke at school since we were all running in separate circles. We attended the same university but did not have many social interactions. Laura, a local princess, was the daughter of Richard Harrison, the owner of Camden Financial, the town's sole bank, which loans to local farms, the feed store, stores, and the majority of local businesses. Most people here receive their vehicle and house loans from his bank, preferring to visit with their banker in person, which is why internet banking has not taken off. Even my father-in-law has given me a little operational loan. Return to Laura. After we finished our bachelor's degrees, she expressed an interest in me. I had a crush on her in school. She was a lovely blonde of average height and build, a cheerleader. Meanwhile, I played quarterback in football, offensive line in basketball, track, and center field in baseball. Laura was not arrogant, but she carried herself with a certain attitude. She dated Kevin, the quarterback and point guard, who subsequently transferred to another institution on a football scholarship, which is where they split up. Laura and I did not socialize together in college. She was an active member of her sorority, the largest on campus, but I was more of a computer geek, spending hours outside of class studying about hardware, software, and other systems. My degree needed a lot of study time, so I worked to supplement my tiny scholarship. My father operated George's Superstore, so we didn't have much, just enough to keep me off grants. To put that into perspective, you could treble the square footage of my parents' home and it would still be smaller than Richard Harrison's main dwelling. During the summer, my father and I would go fishing almost every weekend, while Laura and her parents would fly to Telluride, Tampa, the Bahamas, or Vermont for pleasure. Do you get the idea? We were totally different individuals who just grew up in the same tiny town. Laura unexpectedly expressed an interest in dating me when I returned from college. I never understood why she seemed to be after me. Yes, I had launched a company, but I was working alone. I filed for a small company grant for beginning financing, and by the end of the first year, I was turning a tiny profit. Laura eventually invited me to dance one evening while we were both at a pub with a live band. We fit nicely together. My mother demanded I learn several dances, so I held my own. When the bar closed, we kissed goodbye at her vehicle, and she made me pledge to contact her the following day for a genuine date. I was an only child since something in my mother's womb prohibited further pregnancies. I must have been a miraculous baby. Laura had a sibling who left home at the age of 18 and almost never returned. I don't believe he cared much for Howard. My father died unexpectedly of a heart attack 1 year after I graduated from high school. Mom said that he had been discussing mowing the yard, and after a time, she observed something protruding out of the shed door at the rear of the property. He had lost consciousness, and when she discovered him, it was too late. The ambulance personnel did not even try resuscitation since he had been gone too long. Laura went to the funeral despite the fact that we had only dated a few times. I was glad to see her there. At the grave, she stood by my side, holding my hand while I grieved. She was kind to my mother and supportive of our modest family. My mother's home was all paid for, and Dad's life insurance would provide her with a steady income if she was diligent. Thank God, given how things ended out. The classic joke about a man following a female until she catches him still rings true for me. Laura sought me out, not the other way around. She started our dates and set the tone for our bedtime routine. I won't go into detail, but let's just say we were a good fit. We began dating exclusively, as far as I knew. I didn't hear any stories about her meeting anybody else, and we were together 2 or 3 times a week. Some days, I drove to rural places where huge farms wanted to connect all of their equipment and home PCs to Wi-Fi, overcoming logistical problems such as distance. I'm not sure whether Laura was home at her parents' house on the evenings I was gone. Oh, I forgot about Laura's employment. Her degree was women's studies, thus she was unable to find acceptable job in Brookfield and ended up working for her father. She began as a teller and rapidly advanced to vice president of the loan department. Sure, it was nepotism, but she embraced the position and gained financial expertise, just as her father had planned. Looking back, I see I was duped into marrying under false pretext. Laura informed me of her pregnancy one evening before Christmas that year and inquired as to my plans. Based on my parents' ideals, I proposed on the spot. I should have questioned her timing when she and her mother set a wedding date 9 months after their engagement. By the time I learned she had lied about the pregnancy, it was too late, plans had been made, and invitations had been sent. When I approached Laura, she dismissed it. If I left it up to you, we wouldn't be engaged, much alone married. I adore you and you love me. It'll work. I fell in love with the town's princess. The physical aspect of our relationship was amazing, and I wanted to be with Laura, so I went with it. Even after discovering her lie, I didn't look back. The wedding was the largest anybody could recall in town. We even scheduled it on a Sunday afternoon so that all businesses could shut. The party was spectacular, coordinated by a team from our neighborhood. Our honeymoon was in the Bahamas, where Laura discovered a clothing-optional beach, and we spent the most of our time sunbathing naked. Our time together was filled with passion and adventure as we toured the island on scooters and snorkeled in the Caribbean's pristine seas. After 2 indulgent weeks, we came home and began work. Following the honeymoon, I recruited my first employee, and by the conclusion of our marriage, I had 3 technicians and an accounting secretary. Laura disclosed her pregnancy around a year into our marriage. This time, it was genuine. My little daughter, Lily, was born with all 10 fingers and toes, and I treated her rotten. 2 years later, Jacob was born, and my life felt complete. I was as pleased as one could be. Everything changed during our 6th year of marriage. Laura was unexpectedly forced to work late on several nights and weekends. I could understand the occasional banking conference, but it had been a sluggish year, and there couldn't have been enough loan applications to warrant the additional hours. Laura usually answered my calls, but I tried not to bother her unless it was an emergency. There were no missed calls, and she never sounded out of breath, but I was still concerned. She was seldom home before I went to bed, which harmed our intimate relationship. Many evenings, I'd go straight to bed after putting the kids down, exhausted from traveling to fulfill my clients' requirements. Yes, I had more aid, but it merely saved me from exhausting myself. We were all busy, but I scheduled my days so that I could spend the nights at home, particularly because I couldn't depend on Laura to monitor the kids if she wasn't available. I recall the last time I was with my wife. When I arrived home late on a Sunday night, I was surprised to discover that she had beaten me home and prepared supper. The kids were ecstatic and chatted to her incessantly during the dinner, so we had to remind them to eat. After supper, we cleaned the table and filled the dishwasher before sitting down to watch Frozen for what seemed like the 100th time. Laura had to be the one to tuck the kids in, and I wasn't even permitted near their room. Laura returned to the living room with 2 glasses of wine, dressed in high heels and a nightgown that accentuated her attractiveness and sparked my need. We sat there, drinking wine, and Laura said what she wanted that night. It wasn't a sweet, caring love, but something harsh and powerful. I was scared I wouldn't be able to keep up since it had been a long time since we'd been together, but I gave it my best and fell asleep soundly afterwards. On Sunday morning, I awoke to find Laura clothed and standing by the bed, holding an envelope. "Time to wake up, idiot," she said. I stared, perplexed, wondering where the warm, friendly lady from last night had gone and why she was now screaming obscenities. The children were already dressed and ready to go to their grandparents' place. Laura pushed the envelope to me. "This is where I'll be this weekend. You have roughly 48 hours to move out of my residence. Try anything, and by Wednesday, you'll have a restraining order issued for emotional abuse and aggressive conduct. And just so you know, these divorce papers will be submitted simultaneously." I was astonished. I finally managed to speak. "What is going on? Why are you doing this?" "It's simple, dumbass," she said. "Kevin has returned to work at the bank as his father's right-hand man, and we are getting married as soon as the divorce is finalized. We've been back together for months, and now it's time to make things official." She administered one last strike. "Oh, and because Kevin is unable to have children, he wants to adopt Lily and Jacob. They'll be addressed by their proper names, not the stupid nicknames you gave them." She slammed the door behind her. That weekend, I spent the first 12 hours reading the materials in disbelief. Laura no longer resembled the lady I married. She demanded the property and my business. The agreements indicated that I may continue to work for the company, but only at the minimum pay, which was lower than my other workers. Even though her salary was far larger than mine, she demanded full custody, child support, and alimony, all of which I could not afford. Her automobile would remain hers, but mine was corporate property and could only be driven if I continued work there. She had already depleted our shared money, leaving me with only a few bucks. I eventually quit reading and decided to take action. I phoned everyone I believed could assist. Most of our friends agreed with her, but a few former schoolmates assisted me in loading a trailer with goods Laura would not desire. With nowhere to stay, I ended myself at my employer, which was an old building with a little, run-down flat above. I spent Sunday cleaning, putting together an air mattress and borrowing some second-hand furniture and cooking equipment from friends. On Wednesday morning, fatigued and aching, I took a cold shower, shaved, and prepared to appear in court. Judge Peterson presided over the case, and I had a strong feeling of dread. He had strong links to the Wells family, routinely attending their gatherings and most likely having debts with Camden Financial. His first inquiry broke through the tension, aimed directly at me. "Mr. Grayson, why don't you have legal representation?" he asked. "Judge, I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "My wife handed me the paperwork Sunday morning, and I just started searching for an attorney this morning. I couldn't locate a local lawyer who would accept my case. I need a postponement so that I may get counsel from a nearby town." Request was refused. "I find this incomprehensible," he said, irritated. "According to the case file, these paperwork were submitted 5 weeks ago, and you were served at work the same day. You've had plenty of time to seek advice and submit documentation confirming your financial condition. I have no option but to hold you in contempt of court for your obvious effort to delay." "Your Honor," I argued, my voice rising slightly. "I respectfully object, and I want that this be noted in the official court records. I fear I am being coerced into a one-sided settlement that is just meant to damage me, not benefit my children." My wife might have used our combined financial records to undermine her alimony claims since we shared all of our money. Plus, she's already going to remarry, so alimony shouldn't be an issue. The judge pounded the gavel. A piercing sound reverberated. You've been disrupting these proceedings long enough. You have had ample time to react to the summons. I ruled in favor of the complainant. He slammed the gavel again and exited the room without more remark. I sat there shocked. In minutes, I had lost my wife, almost all contact with my children, and control over my company. I glanced across at my ex-wife, Laura, who had the grace to appear somewhat remorseful before straightening up, her demeanor chilly and smug. You better get to work, she remarked coldly. I'm not paying you to sit there like someone just ruined your day. Hatred swelled inside me, but I pushed myself to remain calm. Noticing the BFF's careful, unpleasant watch, I concluded that losing control may send me in prison, which was just what they wanted. Kavinua, Laura, and their lawyer stood up and walked out of the courtroom. I waited silently until I knew they'd left the building. The bailiff approached me, his voice low. They should have left by now. Other BFFs are keeping an eye on them, but you know the Wells influence here and across the area, he remarked, casting a careful glance about. Find a lawyer in the state capital. That goes far enough. We understand and support you, but we cannot afford to be found out. I nodded and said a polite thank you. When I eventually exited the courtroom, I observed numerous uniformed cops standing outside, watching me depart. My thoughts raced as I made my way to my office. Surprisingly, neither Laura nor Kavinua had showed up yet to celebrate their triumph or exert authority. Strange, I thought. I expected them to arrive immediately away. Gloating in front of everyone. In their absence, I ensured that the workers remained focused on their task, then drafted a check and sent Sarah, our accountant, to the bank to withdraw cash. Tell them I'm heading out of town to service remote clients and need cash, ID said. I believed going myself would result in a ban on the cash, unless a court order said otherwise. They should not block access to corporate accounts. Sarah nodded, and when she went, I considered my alternatives. There was barely enough to handle payment for the following week, and I didn't want my staff to suffer. I took out a few thousand, emptied the petty cash drawer, and left the rest for Laura and Kavinua. Allow them to manage the disaster they had caused. I went away with hatred in my core and a burning desire for vengeance. Hours later, Laura and Kavinua came, parading as if they owned the area. They went immediately to Sarah, handing her the court paperwork verifying the transfer of ownership, and told her that I was no longer an owner, but rather a manager. They didn't discuss my lower income in public, but I knew Sarah would soon inform the others. I maintained my distance, politely explaining that I needed to see a client, and left the office. Staying would have put me in violation of Laura's restraining order, which prohibited me from approaching her within 30 feet. I wasn't going to give them any more power. That evening, I visited a pub owned by a customer of mine. As I approached, he offered me an apology look. Sorry, Daniel, I can't serve you, he murmured gently. Word is out. If anybody here serves or speaks with you, they risk losing their loan conditions. I hope you understand. He smirked, glanced slightly toward the rear door, and I caught his message. Going around the back, he greeted me with a six-pack of my favorite beer. Daniel, I really apologize. Take this on me. I hope the Wells family backs off and allows you to live in peace. I thanked him, accepted the beer, and returned to the shadows. Later that night, when I returned to my lonely apartment, I saw a mattress and box springs placed outside my door. It wasn't new, but it was functional, better than an air mattress. At the very least, I would have a good place to sleep. I settled in after preparing the bed and chilling the beer. It was the nicest night's sleep I'd had in a while, due to a good mattress and a couple cool beers. The following day, I attempted to purchase food at George's superstore. At the checkout, George personally led me out empty-handed. Daniel, I like you, he mumbled. But I can't stand up to Richard Harrison. Hell shut me down if he discovers I served you. I'm sorry. He stared at me severely, then leaned in and added, say hello to your mom, with a disappointed expression for the security camera. He urged me towards the exit. That evening, the goods ID selected were in a wooden box beside my vehicle, locked and secured with steel plates to prevent theft. The key was buried on the driver's side front wheel. I emptied the box and left it there, assuming my anonymous buddy wanted it to remain safe. It would not discourage a committed robber, but it could dissuade a casual passerby. I went out of town for a few days to work with some customers, and an idea began to emerge in my thoughts. Because I couldn't find what I wanted locally, I stopped at a little service station outside of town to get a couple cans of standard petrol and diesel. Every time I left town, I gathered additional goods to carry out my plan. Meanwhile, Laura and Kevinua attempted to make my life miserable. I had to change my phone number since she was phoning constantly. Then a policeman approached me and accused me of breaching the restraining orders. I said that I hadn't even answered her calls, so I couldn't have violated anything. He urged me to quit making issues and then departed. It got to the point where I couldn't fill up my own corporate vehicle with petrol. I needed to send someone else to refuel so I could continue working. My plan eventually came together when the Wells family started mistreating my mother, contacting her many times a day and pressuring her to qualify for a reverse mortgage. The county even said that they had not received her tax payment. When I phoned the tax office, the official muttered that Richard Harrison was forcing him to make problems for her. That was the last straw. He couldn't legally push her on the mortgage, but he was persistent in other ways, causing unnecessary stress in her life. I just needed 1 week to do everything. I intended to act in the middle of the night, when only a few officers were on duty, usually sleeping in their vehicles. I'd slip out to another city to snooze in my vehicle while remaining low-key. I also purchased an ancient, rattling truck from a farmer about 40 miles distant, intentionally postponing registration since the plates were still good for a few months. He concealed it behind an old, abandoned home a mile outside town just for me. I put my plan into action after every business in town had closed for the night. I wandered around, making sure all of the buildings were dark and deserted. I didn't want anybody to get hurt, and maybe a few people wouldn't mind if they did. It was time to act. First, I went to the office and remotely turned off the fire alarms in each of the businesses I intended to attack. Because these technologies were connected into their networks and set up by my firm, I had complete control. I left the hospital and bank systems alone to prevent any possible federal crimes. I began at a convenience shop on the outskirts of town, using a brick to smash the door glass. I mixed diesel and gasoline in a container, lighted a gasoline-soaked wick, and hurled it through the smashed door to fire the inside. The bottle shattered against the shelf, catching immediately. Then I went across town and repeated the procedure, setting fire to another business. I heard sirens. The volunteer fire department had reacted to the first fire, and I couldn't help but grin. Howard was chosen head of the volunteer fire department and served on its board of trustees. He was known for being thrifty with upgrades, and tonight he would face the repercussions of his indifference. I went on to a farm supplies business where the manager was always an idiot, even if I hadn't been mistreated previously. I placed 3 drinks in separate locations to guarantee that the flame spread. The sprinkler system triggered, but since I turned off the sirens, they didn't sound. I knew the fire would spread quicker than the sprinklers could keep up without more water from the fire brigade. The sprinkler system was immediately overloaded, and the majority of the town's commercial area caught fire. I contacted my old house from a landline, and when Laura answered, I talked briefly via an electronic voice changer I purchased at a toy shop. Darth Vader told her that an arsonist was on the prowl and suggested she send the kids to my mother's home for protection. From a neighboring street, I witnessed Laura drive away with the children to her parents' estate approximately an hour later. I expected her to go there first, but she was in for a surprise. I took my time making sure my old home was well lit by the flames before driving a few blocks to my automobile. When she arrived at her parents' gated community, yes, our little town did have one with security, she saw their home on fire, with her mother standing outside wringing her hands. Guess who had access to the community's computer and security systems when the fire started? The security patrol had been deployed to deal with a fake burglary alarm somewhere. Laura remained with her mother for a little longer before they all packed into her vehicle and drove to my mother's place. Because the hotels couldn't check anybody in owing to computer troubles, I ultimately parked the corporate vehicle at the office, threw a Molotov cocktail inside, and set it on fire. Laura, Kevinua, and her oblivious father had no idea I had cancelled the insurance for both the vehicle and the building. I then reached the first fire, where firemen were struggling to control the flames. Howard stood beside the single fire engine, clothed in costly white gear and a helmet, wandering around his half-drunk crew while cops spread over the city. No one halted my progress. Howard's unwillingness to sign mutual assistance agreements left his department alone and made them seem dumb. I crept up behind Howard and used a voice changer with a deep electronic tone. "Don't move, Howard," I said. "Your city is on fire. Change your behavior, or this will happen again. Even your own house is on fire. Stop being an idiot or face the consequences." I threw him into a muddy ditch, dirtying his clean white gear before slipping into the throng to witness the crew's failed attempts to extinguish the fire. I returned to my concealed pickup and fled the region, traveling to a major city 3 states away, knowing the crooked department may still be investigating. I didn't bother creating a new persona or attempting to launch a company. I just accepted a job in IT that was identical to my previous one. After a time, I contacted my mother from a payphone 50 miles from my residence, just in case. Mom seemed relieved to hear from me. She gave the latest. "People thought you might have been in the building when it burned, but when no one was found, someone suggested you left a resignation letter to Laura and Kevin and left town. But, of course, the letter also burnt. Laura and Kevin did not marry. It turned out Kevin was previously married in another state. Laura and the kids lived with me until she found a new, smaller home." Mom went on to say the majority of the burned businesses and homes were insured through a bank-recommended agency. The insurance firm suffered such severe losses that they waived deductibles following an investigation. They were dissatisfied with the fire chief, Richard Harrison, for opposing new firefighting tactics and denying mutual assistance agreements. They actually sued him for it. She giggled quietly. A new bank formed here, making loans to fire companies, reducing Camden Financial's revenues. Howard is now on thin ice since the board of directors of Camden Financial is upset with him. She exhaled. "Because Laura did not marry that slime Kevin, she has lifted the protection order and want to hear from you. She went to the court to change the conditions of her divorce, which had not yet been formalized. You could still be married. When the kids get home from school, they always inquire about you." Mom said, "Did you know Judge Peterson had a secret automobile collection? It too burnt that night and is now reduced to scrap." Howard secured the automobiles at a low cost, causing the judge to lose more than $1 million. He is no longer a fan of Howard. She took a breath. "We are searching for a new police chief. The sheriff isn't running again, and numerous deputies have quit. Laura's parents are searching for homes. Their house was totally ruined. With so few builders available, it might be years before they have a new home." Mom laughed a little. "Laura's mother even inquired if I would sell or rent my home to them. I considered it, but told her I couldn't trust them after the way they treated you." Howard was upset, but even the taxman advised him to be silent. "Oh, they discovered my tax payment." The taxman received the message when his automobiles caught fire. People are happy that Howard's influence has waned and their tax problems have evaporated overnight. Now, it seems that the fires mainly concern Howard and a few company owners. Everyone else believes that the flames cleaned the town. She stopped, then said, "So, when are you going to visit your old mother and the children?" I smiled. "I think I'll plan a trip home soon," I said. "I may need a nicer automobile this time. The last one nearly made it." "See you soon, Mom," I promised. When I finished narrating my narrative, I realized I had survived the painful circumstances of my surprise divorce and was able to get vengeance on my ex-wife, her boyfriend, and her father without anybody dying. Only a few volunteer firemen were injured while attempting to extinguish flames. I set fire to my ex-wife's home after telling her to leave using a voice synthesizer. When she went to get to her parents' home, she discovered it was also on fire. I then relocated far away and established in a new city. Still, when I mentioned my hometown and my mother's house, it was difficult not to think of it as home. Now it's just a memory. My marriage broke up about 5 years ago. My ex-wife, her boyfriend, and my ex-father-in-law seemed to have colluded against me. If she had just told me she had fallen for an old acquaintance, I would have been sad but could have understood. However, they intended to ruin me by taking my children, seizing my company, and assigning me to a low-wage position with exorbitant child support and alimony. I felt so alone that I didn't believe a fair conclusion was conceivable, even in the state capital, where Richard Harrison's influence was felt everywhere. Friends in town assisted me secretly, but they couldn't publicly challenge the strong Camden Financial. I tried not to let my actions affect others, although some may have suffered indirectly. That night, I wasn't sure whether law enforcement would come after me, so I didn't hide but kept my whereabouts secret. Even my mother had no idea where I resided. My workplace, a huge regional organization with centralized HR, kept my personal information private. Laura's lawyer or Laura herself would sometimes try to find me via HR, pretending as my mother. I switched phones and contacted my mother after driving some distance. Finally, I texted her to ensure it was me. We discussed local gossip, which invariably included my ex-wife and her father. Laura said she was still my wife after Kavinua acknowledged to being married and fled town, pleading with my mother to force me back. Mom would chuckle and say there was little likelihood of that. She'd explain how Laura and the kids had often inquired about me over the years. I quietly went home to check on my mother and make sure she hadn't revealed my whereabouts. I ultimately got rid of my old vehicle and saved enough money to purchase a solid automobile with cash. I avoided loans since my ex-father-in-law's bank identified me as overdue, ruining my credit. I stopped trusting banks and paid cash for everything to avoid leaving a paper trail. I avoided any kind of transportation that may trace my travels, paid cash for gas, and stored a cache of cash in several locations. After some study, I settled on a popular automobile brand and color, purchasing an older, fuel-efficient model. I picked clean, quiet, non-chain lodgings along my itineraries that accepted cash, making my trips untraceable. Yes, that is what I meant by routes. When I travel, I take many different pathways. Sometimes I'd add a few hundred miles to my route home to make my excursions more unexpected, just in case my ex-wife got wind and sent an investigator after me. People may scoff, but with almost everyone in my hometown, people I grew up with and conducted business with, turning against me as a result of her and her father's hatred, a little anxiety seems reasonable. Some people, including my mother, still believe I should reconcile with my ex, but that will never happen. I'd periodically take a week off and go to Brookfield, Illinois, to visit my mother and children. From our phone conversations, I knew Lily and Jacob spent every afternoon with their mothers until she ended her lengthy workday. Laura was overburdened operating my former IT company and competing for customers. My mother informed me that numerous of my previous customers had suggested they would return to me if I started a new firm. It was enticing, yet after all that had transpired, it no longer seemed like my hometown. So I'd go there unexpectedly to prevent my mother tipping off Laura. I'd welcome my children by their preferred names, Lily and Jacob, and they'd leap into my arms, eager to convey all that had happened since my previous visit. Then we'd all get in the vehicle, including Mom, and travel an hour to our neighborhood. We'd spend the day together eating, watching movies, going to a children's museum, and feeding ducks in the park. I'd chat to the kids and catch up with my mother, who would always lecture me on forgiveness. I would simply nod and let her ramble, but nothing changed. Mom often told me how miserable Laura appeared, never smiling, constantly asking about me, ostensibly seeking forgiveness for what she'd done. However, she never sought for my forgiveness and Mom never indicated if Laura loved me. One day, I discovered Mom discreetly messaging Laura from my phone. My initial inclination was to shout, but I reminded myself that she was my mother and she had reared me. I took a big breath and inquired gently what she was attempting to accomplish. Daniel, Laura is scared you may kidnap the kids. She just wants to know they are secure. She is their mother, after all, Mom said. Well, I don't trust her, I said. She's proven to be deceitful, and if she knew where we were, the police would probably show up in minutes. I kept back harsher remarks with the kids there, but 3 police vehicles soon arrived in the restaurant parking lot where we were sitting, confirming my concerns. They did not recognize my automobile and ultimately went without addressing us. Mom was astonished when she realized Laura had deceived her son. Laura just wants to know where we are so she may join us and chat. You two should sit down and figure this out, she remarked. I shake my head. Why don't you call her right now and hear what she has to say? I gave her the phone and she set it on speaker. Laura's anxious voice cut through right away. Have they caught him? Was he arrested? I told them he kidnapped my kids and took them out of town. Mom looked stunned. She couldn't believe Laura would want to arrest me for seeing my own children, which is plainly documented in court records. Finally, Mom said, "No, Daniel saw me text you and we left. We watched from the parking lot as the cops approached." "Why are you doing this to him?" "I thought you'd join us, not call the cops," Mom remarked. Laura swiftly adjusted her tone, attempting to minimize the incident. "Barbara, I just wanted him to sit down and discuss. I assumed that if he was held, he would have to communicate with me. I intended to drop the charges after that." I shook my head in disdain, knowing she'd only drop them if it benefited her while harming me. Then Laura inquired, "Where are you?" "I want my kids to be safe with me." I couldn't hold back. "Listen, kids are safe with me and Mom. We're going home tonight. I did not hijack them, and the only danger is your manipulation. If the police arrested me, our children would know it was on your instructions. Have you thought about how this affects their faith in you? And why would I take them from you?" As I drove out of the parking lot, I assumed Laura was looking for us nearby. Mom gave me a stern look but remained quiet. I made one last comment to Laura. "We're heading home now. You'll have to find another reason to arrest me." Mom switched off the speakerphone as the kids began wailing, feeling my rage. She talked quietly to Laura before hanging up and reassuring Lily and Jacob, who gradually calmed down as we drove the entire way. I was worried, half expecting to get pulled over. I reassured myself that no one knew the model or color of my vehicle, but I continued to check the mirrors and avoided speeding. When we arrived in Brookfield, I drove a longer route and circled the area to check that nothing was put up at my mother's home. Satisfied, I handed off Mom and the kids, then swiftly drove away and returned later, carefully avoiding discovery. I generally hired a hotel a few miles from town and went to see the kids every day for a week, but with Laura potentially keeping them, I traveled a few hours before staying for the night. I realized things needed to change. I decided to contact Laura using the motel's Wi-Fi. I set up a video call so she could see how unhappy I was, and I made sure nothing identifying was visible behind me. I intended to depart immediately after the conversation to avoid her tracing me down using the motel's IP address. When I made my first video call attempt, it connected immediately and Laura responded instantaneously. I didn't want to see her, but I knew it was necessary for the game I was playing. Even after 5 years, she still looked nice, but I reminded myself that her beauty was just skin deep. "Daniel, I'm glad to see you," she remarked. "Why didn't you come over and visit the kids?" "Because I never know if the police will be waiting for me," I told him. "It seems someone's decided I'm the root of all your family's problems." "Daniel, no one's searching for you," she told me. "The state police and an arson investigator did come over, but they found nothing definite. Sure, some people assume you are involved since you left town, but my father has created enough of enemies himself. The fire department even expelled him. He can no longer serve on any boards. Good riddance. All I care about is being able to visit my children," I said firmly. Laura's expression changed slightly. "Daniel, I just wanted you to speak to me. I figured if you were detained, we could sit down and talk things out. I would have dropped the charges immediately after that." I shake my head. "You'd probably only dump them if it worked in your favor. Even if I was apprehended and then freed, it would still be evident that I was previously held for hijacking my own children. Do not bother explaining. If you retract your complaint, won't this result in a false report on record?" Laura sneered. "They wouldn't do it to me. Dad would not allow it." I raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the same old Laura, Dad fixes everything, even if it's unethical or violates my rights." Then she delivered a bombshell, "You are not my ex. We are still married." I frowned. "No, I have documents proving we divorced and that I no longer have any legal rights to my kids." "After the fire, I asked my lawyer to cancel our divorce," she said calmly. Since it hadn't been finalized within 90 days, Judge Peterson was so furious with my father over the loss of his car collection that he signed off on it. I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. Why would you and your father push me to the edge? I had a family, a company, and a good reputation in the community before losing everything. Prison was looming because you put me up. I had no option but to flee to prevent false accusations. She seemed taken aback, as if really astonished. That was never our intention. Oh, really? I fired back. My face conveys a different story. Why was I forced to give up my children without the opportunity to employ a lawyer? Why was I relegated to the minimum wage in my own business? You, your father, and Kevin all appeared intent on ruining me. Laura shook her head and denied it. Sure, I said, my voice full of cynicism. You really cared about my interests. Just to remind me who had the power. You put me in your bed one night, then took my kids the following morning and called me every name in the book. You wrecked my life and even attempted to evict my mother on fake tax charges. No, she argued. Dad would never be thus nasty. He would never harm your family. I chuckled, but it came off harsh and unpleasant. If you had informed me you had fallen for Kevin again, I would have let you leave. Instead, your father believed that retaining the children would tie me down, compelling me to continue paying the expenses in order to preserve your family's lifestyle. Laura's tone softened somewhat. Dad said it would keep you from suing for custody. He thought this would stabilize everything. Well, it didn't, I said. Instead, he propagated tales about me, making it impossible for me to go grocery shopping or get petrol without fear of being judged. You both attempted to steal everything from me, even my mother. That was my breaking point. I couldn't let you ruin her either. I had let too much leak. I was hoping Laura hadn't taken notes. Giving Howard anything to use against me would be disastrous. I terminated the conversation, trying to restrain my wrath. I knew I had to go immediately. Despite my tiredness, I drove many hundred miles in the other way, eventually turning off into a lonely road and sheltering behind a dense grove of trees to sleep. This was the closest call I'd had on one of my undercover trips to see the kids. I remained careful, using several phones and even Skype on occasion to keep up with my children's rapid development. I eventually gathered enough money to hire a lawyer and pay in cash to quietly verify my marital status and parental rights. Laura had not been lying. We were still legally married. I stopped deducting child support from my income and instead transferred money to my mother, ordering her to spend it on Lily and Jacob, not Laura. The lawyer also learned that the children's adoptions had been annulled. Kevin reportedly lost interest when he did not get the advantages he anticipated. Knowing that I was still legally married, I filed for divorce, even if it required going to my hometown for a hearing. Despite my lawyer's assurance that the arson case had been resolved, I remained apprehensive. Howard remained a formidable personality, even if his influence had decreased. As is customary, I booked into a modest hotel on the outskirts the day before the hearing under a fictitious identity. The hotel owner recognized me and protected my privacy. The next morning, I left any firearms in the vehicle since the courthouse had metal detectors. When the hearing started, Judge Thompson, yes, the same judge as before, asked Laura and her attorney what they wanted out of the case. Surprisingly, Laura said that she desired therapy and reconciliation, portraying our marriage as a great misunderstanding. She painted me as a negligent spouse who had abandoned his family. My lawyer then had her time to answer. I had been open with Laura about my night of vengeance, though she sensibly avoided discussing it. Instead, she made public the contents of my original divorce procedures, reminding the judge of his personal involvement in them. Judge Thompson glanced at me strangely, maybe thinking about his new automobile collection, and sat back calmly, listening as my lawyer proceeded. But when she mentioned Laura's effort to get me imprisoned for kidnapping my own children, he leaned forward and focused on her. "Is this true?" he asked. "Did you submit a complaint claiming Mr. Grayson abducted the children, despite the fact that his visitation rights enabled him to see them at any time?" Laura, looking caught, turned to her lawyer for assistance, but he remained mute. The judge pushed on. "Why would Daniel come back here to see you again? This guy was embarrassed and shunned in his hometown. His mother was also maltreated. Why would he want to reconcile? Is it for the sake of the children, or for your own selfish reasons? Do you anticipate him to face the same maltreatment if things go wrong again? Before Laura could respond, her lawyer interrupted, seeking a quick break and a private discussion with the court. My lawyer shrugged but did not protest, and the court approved the break. Both the attorneys and the judge left the room, returning soon with faces that told it all. The judge seemed outraged. Laura's lawyer was embarrassed, whilst my lawyer was beaming. When the hearing continued, Judge Thompson introduced an unexpected witness. "Richard Harrison, please take the oath and come to the stand." I hadn't realized my father-in-law was present. Howard walked forward, gave me a hateful look, and took the oath with a smug demeanor, as if he controlled the courtroom. The judge began, "Mr. Wells, explain us why you're here and what you can bring to this case." Howard stared at the court and began yelling, "I don't see why my idiotic daughter wants that weak fullback. Has just caused us grief. I want him locked up and forgotten." Howard's diatribe came to an end when the judge slammed his gavel. "Your daughter's lawyer advised that you had anything significant to offer. Please do so." Howard remained unfazed, saying, "I never wanted my daughter to marry this nobody. I endured that until Kevinua Webster began working with me. I arranged for Kevinua to spend time with Laura in the hopes of winning her over. She eventually fell love him, and it's a pity she didn't have his kid." The court said, "Were you aware Kevinua was already married with children?" Howard scarcely blinks as he speaks. The intention was for him to get divorced secretly and adopt Lily and Jacob. Just what I wanted from the start. Grayson should not have fed anybody linked to me. I hated seeing him at my table. The court listened without interruption before asking, "Did you want to push Mr. Grayson out of town or into prison?" "Prison was the goal," Howard said calmly. "So what if grounds to keep him away from my daughter and her children?" The judge's stare became sharper. "So you used your influence to mistreat Mr. Grayson, creating circumstances to provoke him into breaking the law, and encouraging your daughter to call him and report fabricated violations?" Howard grinned. "Yes, Your Honor. That was my idea. I instructed Laura to phone him and then reported him to the police myself. I have no idea why he was never arrested." The judge nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Thank you, Mr. Wells. You are dismissed." Howard exited the stand with a bitter expression that grew as the judge spoke. "Mr. Wells, I am forwarding the trial record to the district attorney for potential charges. You abused your authority to harass this guy, and I, tragically, allowed it. This is something I plan to fix." Howard's face slumped as he realized his power was no longer unchallenged. He looked at the judge, who only grinned before dropping his head and departing. Turning to Laura's counsel, the judge said, "Do you have anything else before I make my decision?" Laura's lawyer rose swiftly. "Your Honor, my client was unaware of her father and Kevinua's intentions. She was as much a victim as Mr. Grayson, which is why she sought therapy to repair their marriage." Judge Thompson directed his attention to me and my counsel. We both nodded our heads, suggesting that we had nothing else to say. He then addressed Laura directly. "I'm sorry, Laura, but even if you were misled, it doesn't justify the way you treated your husband." He added firmly, "You sought to have him jailed on bogus accusations. I honestly don't see how he could ever forgive enough to let you back into his life." Laura stood up and said, "I love you, Daniel. I need you back, for the children's sake." Her attorney promptly advised her to sit down before the court could penalize her for contempt. Judge Thompson returned unperturbed. "If your spouse had asked for full custody, I may have given it based on your treatment of him. But he has shown himself to be the better guy in all of this. His terms are more than reasonable. He hasn't even asked for the restoration of his business. I rule in favor of the plaintiff," he stated before striking his gavel and leaving the courtroom. In that moment, I felt completely liberated. Laura sat alongside her lawyer, weeping as he attempted to calm her. My lawyer went to me and shook my hand. "Do you want to initiate a legal claim against your former father-in-law?" he asked. I shake my head. My children still need to connect with him and their granny. I am not going to meddle with that. She nodded and we left the courtroom. Laura grabbed my sleeve and begged me to talk with her as we went out. She briefly distracted me, and I almost missed a movement to my right. "Now, let me state this, I'm not a fighter. I wasn't a Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, or a fan of MMA, but I've always enjoyed John Wayne's The Quiet Man, particularly the moment in which his brother-in-law attempts to ambush him in front of the whole village. I kept that motion in mind as a defensive plan, and as I was walking away, Howard took a swing at me. He lunged for my head, but I ducked slightly, leading him to miss and leaving himself exposed. I used a quick left hook to his stomach, like John Wayne did, and it worked. Howard doubled over and gasped for breath. I followed with a right punch to his face, knocking him to the ground. I waited there, hands clenched, waiting for him to rise. I was not willing to point out his flaws in front of everyone, even if he deserved it. Just thereafter, county officers rushed into the courtroom to arrest Howard on accusations of assault. He hardly had time to absorb what was going on before they shackled him and gave him his rights before lifting him to his feet. He made matters worse by threatening me and then attempting to headbutt one of the deputies. That maneuver immediately aggravated his predicament, resulting in a felony prosecution for assaulting an officer. The deputies, who also worked for our sheriff's department, promptly detained him. Laura stood in startled silence, apparently unprepared for the unexpected turn of events. She and everyone else appeared surprised by my cool determination. I caught her lawyer's eye and nodded. He nodded and returned his focus to Howard, seeking to soothe him before he dug himself deeper. I glanced at Laura. "Laura, listen to me," I urged. "It is over. Don't make matters worse by depriving me time with the children. Your father needs you right now. Call your mother. Do anything you can to assist him before things spiral out of hand." She glanced at me, and it all seemed to settle in. Her countenance softened, revealing a mixture of melancholy and regret. She turned to help her father as he struggled to regain his dignity. As the excitement went off, I noticed my right hand was hurting. When I looked down, I saw a few of fingers twisted at unusual angles. When the agony struck me, I realized what had happened. I had fractured my hand. My lawyer saw the expression on my face and immediately volunteered to transport me to the hospital. X-rays revealed that Howard's skull was as hard, if not harder, than my hand. Soon, I was on painkillers and wearing a cast. Bless her, my lawyer remained with me and drove me to my mother's place to recuperate. The only major drawback to the accident was the discomfort and the necessity for surgery to correctly fix the bones. Otherwise, I was able to visit my children every day that week as I recovered and became closer to them. I put up with Laura's regular visits to pick up the kids. My mother and Laura utilized these occasions to attempt to reintegrate me into family life. I'd just spend more time with the kids or go on lengthy walks when she was around. After a week, I returned to my new city and employment. Years passed and my children grew up. During the summer and holidays, they would spend weeks with me. Laura sometimes brought them personally, while other times they flew in. She eventually concluded it wasn't worth the lengthy drive if she had to stay in a hotel. It occurred to her that there would be no rekindling between us. For the sake of the children, we kept things cordial, and I forgiven her enough not to call her names. Several previous customers contacted me, wanting me to return and regain the company. Eventually, I persuaded Laura to sell the firm to me and convert it into a district office. It was modest but thriving, resulting in higher total revenues. My responsibility was to keep it viable, so I'd fly into the closest regional airport once a month and hire a vehicle to see customers. Fortunately, we have a strong local staff to manage most of the day-to-day challenges. Laura had many different partners before settling into a long-term relationship with her former lawyer. They had no intentions for children, so they just coexisted. Howard was convicted, however he only served his sentence on weekends for 6 months. While that may seem reasonable, he was also had to do 200 hours of community service. He was offered the alternative of cleaning the city's ditches or cooking and serving meals to the homeless. Howard seemed to have developed a talent for cooking, since he continued to volunteer even after serving his term. He also received 5 years of probation. Mom is doing fine. She found a new guy, who is a wonderful companion and keeps her happy in retirement. She loves her 2 grandchildren and sees them every day when they aren't visiting me. Then there's good old Kevin. I'm not sure who told his wife, but she made his life terrible for years. She booted him out, filed for divorce, and made sure he had little money left over after paying for the home, vehicles, and child support. She ultimately enticed him back with the promise of reconciliation, only to tie him to a chair and sleep with two of his buddies in front of him. She divorced him shortly thereafter, leaving him with little chances for the future. As for me, I am still a work in progress. I have serious trust difficulties, particularly with ladies and future in-laws. I date and sometimes have a nice social life. There are lots of unmarried or divorced women out there, the majority of whom have children. I strive to have a good impact on their children, but I avoid long-term attachments. I am honest with the women I date, but each one believes she will be the one to mend me. However, something constantly comes up that convinces me that a long-term relationship isn't possible. I work with a therapist and we are working on trust difficulties. I currently possess a 3-bedroom property that I paid for in full with cash. I still don't trust banks, even if my credit score has improved, owing in part to my ex-father-in-law. Without asking, he altered his credit bureau records. Maybe I should have hit him at the beginning of our relationship. However, it is unlikely that this would have made a difference. Overall, I'm content with my life. Sure, I miss the intimacy of a personal connection, but seeing so many marriages fail around me, I don't feel out of step with the times. As the phrase goes, life moves on. Thank you for watching. Do you believe vengeance was warranted here? Please let us know in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe.